Okay, I think this is everybody, so why don't we go ahead and get started? First and foremost, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and coming to listen to a conversation about resilient change. You know, one of the things that we heard in the keynote address yesterday was talking about building the anti-fragile law firm. And I heard whispers of lots of people out there, what does anti-fragile mean? And so many people were saying resilient, and I thought, oh, they're all going to come to my presentation. I can't wait. So I was very encouraged by that. So by way of quick introduction, my name is Todd Smith. I am an industry account specialist with Intuit, specifically with the QuickBooks team, but I'm also a retired attorney. I was a litigator for more than 12 years. I worked in a corporate legal department for several years after that. I even tried my own hand at my own, setting up my own shingle and having my own practice for a little while. But after about 18 months of chasing clients and chasing dollars, I decided to find a different approach to business. As I go through the exhibitor hall, I talk and have conversations with some of the exhibitors there, and I just tell them, where were you guys when I was out on my own and I was trying to do this on my own? And I don't want to date myself too much, but you know, in 2001, there wasn't a Clio. There wasn't anything known as, online legal marketing to get clients. There wasn't really anything outside of, ironically enough, QuickBooks, which is what I used for my accounting solution. So in that sense, it's come full circle. But when we're talking about building resilient change, we really are talking about the issue and the question of change itself. So I love this quote that I'm going to go with here today, which is, I apologize. There we go. So the secret of change is to focus all of your energy on not fighting the old, but on building the new. Socrates. Also, that person that gave us the interrogatory method that we still is the bane of our existence from law school. You know, the thing about Socrates is that he had said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And so he had thought about and shared his ideas about always looking forward, looking for what are the impacts of your thoughts, the impacts of what you do today. And it was this concept about proactive thinking. Think not about what you're doing, think about what you're doing and how it impacts others around you. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about with change, because that's what change really is about. So, we think about in the practice of law today, we all leverage technology. Somebody was saying just last night, this isn't really a legal conference, it's a technology conference with a legal focus. And it's true, law firms today are so much more advanced than they have been in the past. And they need to be able to manage the client journeys that they're having. Think about it from this perspective. There are firms that are using relativity-driven e-discovery models. They're using AI-enhanced search. They're using high-level technology to manage their practice and manage their client journeys. But every law firm is still using some fundamental tools. They're using email. They're using a word processor. They're using accounting services. And they put these all into their technology stack to try and manage their business. But it's difficult, especially in the small to mid-sized law firm practice, to determine how are we going to manage this? How are we going to be sure that we are able to do the things that we need to do to ensure the outcomes that we want to do it? And so one of the very first things you have to think about is, what are we doing today and can we do it better? So the question comes up, why? And after why, we're going to talk about we're going to talk about when, and then we're going to talk about who. And the first step in this, why change? Well, change is really scary. Nobody likes to consider change. One of the oldest and strongest emotions in mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And if anybody would know about fear, it would be somebody like H.P. Lovecraft. And the truth of the matter is that we fear what we don't understand. But at the same time, we must embrace that what we don't understand in order to understand what we're going to be able to do and accomplish moving forward. So we think about, first of all, what are change drivers? Changes in the legal industry, in the legal services industry. When I was an associate in the late 90s, excuse my age, the idea of e-discovery, of using analytic machines to run through thousands of pages of documents to find those documents relevant to the queries that I had about my case, that didn't exist. I was a senior associate. I was paid very, very well, and I would spend weeks at a time in the basement going through banker's boxes of documents, searching for documents that were relevant to the particular case that we had at hand. A concept like that now to attorney is completely foreign. So there are changes that are constantly driving how we do things within the legal practice that we have to be able to adapt to. And it's not just the technology on the cutting edge there, it's things that our clients are asking for. They're asking for new billing methods, they're asking for new billing models. Clients don't want a paper bill, they want an invoice emailed to them where they can click pay my bill, send it back, and they're done, and they don't have to think about it. At the same time, we need to be able to make sure that we're looking at those tools that we're leveraging and making sure that they are addressing those questions that we have today, as well as what we want to solve for tomorrow. And those are changes within the legal service industry. The other thing that we have is we have outside changes. So you can see by this quote here from Heraclitus, only constant in life is change. I like my Greek philosophers. This isn't the last quote you're going to see. But the truth of it is there are outside changes. And when we think about outside changes, can anyone think of a change that's happened in the last 3 years that significantly impacted your business and your practice as an attorney? Go ahead and shout it out. COVID, okay? Nobody 4 years ago was expecting a generational global pandemic. But you know what else we weren't thinking about 4 years ago? Doing status conferences via Zoom, doing depositions via Zoom, doing client intakes entirely through chat, never talking to our clients until after the engagement letter has been signed. So in other words, we learned to change because there was change brought upon us. That's not always going to be the most effective way to implement change, though. What we want to do is we want to think about, when do I know it's time to adapt? Well, I always say if you have to ask the question of, is it time? It's probably a little too late. And so we think about things like reactive change being very different from adaptive change. When we think about that, one of the things I like to think about is the asteroid that hit the planet millions of years ago. Who survived? So we had dinosaurs walking around, they ruled the earth, asteroid hits, who survives? Rodents. Cockroaches, little beings that could scurry around, hide under rocks, who didn't need as much food and as much fuel as dinosaurs did. And so they were far more adaptable. Now, everybody says uses the term from Darwin, survival of the fittest. But that's not what Darwin said. Darwin specifically said it is not the strongest nor the most fit that survives. It is the organism that is most adaptable to change that will survive. And so in that very same sense, we think about the fact that you have to have an adaptive approach, and you have to think about what's happening today and where I want to be tomorrow. The questions that you don't want to ask, you don't want to have that reactive approach. You don't want to sit and look around going, my business is plateauing. I'm not bringing in as much business as I used to. My clients are going somewhere else. My employees are unhappy. I need to change. That's reactive change. You no longer have a choice in the situation. You need to implement change in order to ensure that you survive as a business. What you want to look for, and the real question you need to ask is, are we in the best position for growth? Company growth is always going to be the most important consideration. So when you think about company growth, you don't sometimes know that you have a problem until you're already within it. You want to avoid that circumstance. I love these questions that are up here on this. So when we think about this, if you have to ask the right questions. Looking here, my firm's tech falls on this part of the scale. And look what the choices were. 1 being Stone Age, 10 being cutting edge. And everybody falls in at about a 5.6. So if we measure between Stone Age and cutting edge on the basis of human existence, we're somewhere around the Bronze Age is where most of these attorneys think their firm is at. It's not exactly where you think they would want to be. Even more unimpressive, if you will, is my firm uses technology to reduce tedious tasks. Average rating is 4.7. So who's the audience that was asked these questions? It was asked of everybody who wasn't the firm owner. It was not a partner. It wasn't a shareholder in the firm. It was the support staff. It were the associates. And these are the people that are going to be involved in and affected most by the systems that you employ. And then, of course, the next group that's going to be involved in that are your clients. And what are their outcomes going to look like? So in order to sit there and determine, well, okay, if I really want to know when it's time to change, and if I really want to see if I'm in a good situation to be able to manage change going forward, I need to start thinking about my audience. And so when we think about the when, you need to know the who. And I put them into 3 separate categories. The first one, as we were just discussing, are employees. They're going to be the first ones impacted by change. They're going to be the ones that are going to be most invested in both the process as well as be able to give you the best feedback. So in other words, when we're trying to build out change and we're trying to implement methods and trying to implement strategies that are going to be most efficient and most effective, you need to get that buy-in from your employees. I was once talking with a partner in a law firm, and I said to him, so he was coming to us, and he said, I really need to make some changes within my firm and within my tech stack. I don't know where to begin. And I said, well, have you talked to your employees? He says, you know what? They just want to complain about everything. I don't need to listen to them. I heard that reaction, and that's the point. I said, if they're complaining, what are they complaining about? Oh, they say they have to do a lot of tasks over and over again. There's a lot of manual work. There's no automation. And I'm just sitting there writing off the list. I said, well, I know exactly where we need to go with this. We're going to go in, we're going to survey your entire staff and get their feedback and get into some specifics. But then, of course, the next group is your clients. We talk about the client-focused law practice. We talk about everything being client-centric, and we talk about those client journeys. And so when we're talking about client journeys, we're really trying to think about the fact, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to solve problems with our tech stack, or are we trying to improve what our client journeys are like? I love this quote. It's from Suman Sakar. He's a partner with 3S Consulting. And he says, the belief that clients come second is dead wrong. What he contends is that disruption is in fact driven by changing client needs, and only those firms that truly understand their clients will ever succeed. And so when they're talking about that, what they're saying is you need to have an empathetic approach with your clients. You need to understand what their outcomes need to be and what you're doing today to deliver on those. Because it's not just about that interface. The first time a client contacts you, how are they getting a hold of you? How are they communicating with you? How are they receiving their bills? Those are all very important. But the client journey is more than that. The client journey is what the client doesn't see. It's the work that you're doing behind the scenes. Are you using efficient systems? Are you able to do things and deliver services in an efficient manner? Are you able to do it in a cost-effective manner? And so it's not just the direct interaction, but how you are actually leading the customer through, or the client through the process of working with you. And then the last one, your trusted advisors. Now, of course, I'm going to be biased towards the importance of trusted advisors, but I will tell you this, when we talk about grumpy employees and you want to come and talk to them about implementing thoughts around change and talking about how can we engage with our employees in a manner that's going to get them excited about the concept of making change, the first thing employees do is say, you're the people who haven't been listening to me all along, and so now suddenly you want my input in this process. As my father used to put it, a prophet in his own home is ignored. So even though the partner now may have a good idea, the business owner may have a good idea about what to do, people are sort of burnt out from it. And so that's where a trusted advisor can sometimes break down those walls. And so they can actually help you take down those silos and take unproductive behaviors that block efforts and tear them down and get to the heart of what's really driving the issues or problems that you're facing today. And so you're going to want to be able to engage with them. So we talked a little bit about why. We've talked a little bit about when, and we've talked a little bit about who are the stakeholders in the process. So now we come to the next part, the most difficult step, getting started. So when you think about getting started, there are some things that we want to address as we first go on this journey of change together. And the very first one that we want to think about is setting expectations. Again, just to that point I was addressing a second ago, if you treat a person as they are, disgruntled, unhappy, not satisfied, they're going to remain that way. Treat a person as they can be and as they should be, and they will become that. So with that concept, I love this image here. Look at these happy, smiling faces. This is an image. My marketing team helps me put these decks together. I give them the words. They build this out, and they thought this image was great. And I looked at it, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic. Look at those happy faces. They're super engaged. They're smiling at the camera. You can tell they're at a corporate event. They're waving the company flags. Everything's great. You can see them there. We'll call those happy people think of them as the people that are involved in a change process. So who have we got? This is team change. First person here, here's the IT director. Maybe this is the systems admin. Here's the program manager who's really going to be overseeing the project. Here's that stakeholder within the firm who really has ownership of all of this. And they're happy, they're in on this. They love the idea of change. But when you have this picture expanded, you can kind of look out and see everybody else. So if we have this gentleman over here who's asking, I don't know what the heck anybody's talking about. Nobody asked me any questions. We have this girl here saying, you know what? I don't even work on this particular area, so I'm just going to check Instagram. We have this person here saying, well, I had a different idea, but nobody listened to me. And then we have her. She's just happy to be there. She's like, I don't want to get involved. You have to involve the entire organization. It has to be part of it. Team change cannot be led by 4 people and then pushed onto everyone else. What happens then is that you have processes in place that no one's going to embrace and no one's going to employ. So building that consensus, building that emotional commitment, you're going to be able to be more successful with any change. As a matter of fact, emotional commitment is found to be almost 4 times more influential than practical adoption. So in other words, if people are emotionally attached to it, if people feel in themselves, this is something important, this is going to make my life better, they're going to take that on, they're going to take that mantle on, they're going to buy into the process. Because again, as we pointed out, we need to have everybody involved in that process. So we have to think about how we're going to set that up. And one of the ways that we do that is by expectation setting and being honest and frank with that expectation setting. You know, some of the things that we have to understand is that change is always going to take longer than anticipated. It's going to cost more than you anticipated. It's going to be less embraced at first than you expected it to be. But change is also not going to do some things for you. It's not going to solve institutional issues. I can give you workflows for days that are absolutely fantastic and have been proven in other firms just like yours to improve outcomes, increase efficiency, raise client satisfaction. But if there are other problems with the firm, this change isn't going to help you. It's not going to create value on its own. It has to be leveraged and employed correctly. And you know what? It's never, ever going to be easy. So you have to set those expectations for the entire organization, not just for team change. So if we think about, we've got our expectations set, we've asked some of the right questions to get started, what is a true first step? And that true first step is a technology audit. What is a technology audit? It's right there. It's a thorough evaluation of a business's IT infrastructure and how it currently uses that infrastructure, including operations and policies. So it's not just software. It's not just hardware. It is how those all work together to get you to the solutions and the results that you're looking for. And if you do a proper audit, it's going to show you how well you're using your assets, how well you are leveraging your data, and don't forget, please don't forget, data is probably the single most important asset your firm has. You may have software that costs you $20,000 a year to leverage. You may have the best servers and the best hardware, the best phone system, but nothing is more valuable than your data. And so you have to consider that as part of that asset that you have within the firm. And so when we think about auditing specifically for law firms, we really want to think about 4 considerations. Regulatory compliance. Do my processes and systems today comport and comply with all of the regulatory requirements that I have, just as operating as a law firm in my jurisdiction? Continuity of services. Do I have disaster recovery? Do I have insurance that I have uptime guarantees? Am I going to be able to deliver on my clients? I have deadlines to respond to. I need to make sure that I'm going to be able to be responsive. And should there be something that takes me offline, I have a redundancy plan in place to take care of it. Protection of personal information. We are fiduciaries as attorneys. And so we have a higher responsibility to protect our clients' information and data than maybe another business might. Certainly data breaches by other companies might give us pause, and we think to ourselves, how disastrous was that for their company? But if you mishandle clients' data and clients' information, not only is it disastrous for your relationship with that client, not only is it disastrous for your client, but you might end up yourself in front of the bar having to answer for why and how that happened. A lot of times people forget that you can get in trouble with the bar, not for doing something intentional and intentional misdeed. Of course, that's going to land you there, and it should. But just simply by having sloppy processes, you can run afoul of bar regulations and requirements. You certainly will run afoul possibly of court requirements, and as well as other regulatory agencies that you have to advocate in front of on behalf of your clients. And so protection of personal information is very, very important. And then finally, the last thing that we're looking at here is optimization. Now, obviously, I've been talking about creating processes that improve client outcomes and client journeys, and that talks and focuses on optimization. So why do we talk about it last in this audit process? Because you have to secure the regulatory compliance, the continuity of service, the protection of personal information, and that has to be done and taken care of before you can consider optimization. So you want to be sure that you are looking at all of those in a cycle of information, and it is a closed system, and seeing how they all interact with one another. And then you sit there and look at your results so that you have an idea of where you are. Because we can't start a journey going forward if we don't know first where we are. I included this graph because I love this one. It asks a series of questions. Agility is baked into our organization's DNA. We regularly outchange our competitors and industry peers. We continually and systemically research and anticipate change. We execute planned changes well, and we cope well with unplanned change. And if you look at the results, you would think, on the surface, this actually looks great. I see that less than 30% are answering negatively on we continually and systemically research and anticipate change. 30% are answering negatively on agility is baked into our organization's DNA. But I always look at that gray spot in the middle, that 35%. And I think that 35%, which says, I somewhat agree. I translate, I somewhat agree to, I'm not sure this survey is anonymous. And that's a very honest approach. I mean, when you actually ask for those honest opinions from people, they're going to give you that honest opinion, as long as they know that they're going to be protected and covered with it. So now we think about this. So we've asked the right questions. We've talked about building in buy-in. We've talked now about getting that audit as a starting point of understanding where we are. So how do we actually do and implement real change within our organization? So what we like to look at is change and impact analysis. And there are 7 crucial R's of change management. It's an easy way to remember this process. And we start with raised. Who raised the question or the need for change? Who was this person? What is their role in the organization? You want to single this person out or single out these group of voices, because if they saw the issue, they're going to have input that's probably going to be very valuable to the process. So you want to understand who raised it and why they raised these questions. Reason. What is the reason for change? Change because, my law school buddy who works in a firm over in Oklahoma, they've been doing this and they've had great success with it. That's not a reason for you to change. So you need to think about what is the actual impact? What is the change needed? And what is the evidence? What's the proof that I need to do that change? Return. So what is my anticipated return? Don't start a journey if you don't know where you're going. You won't know if you're there. You won't know if you've succeeded. So you have to think, what is going to be my return on that investment? And that investment's not just money. That investment is human capital. It's my time. It's my focus. And so we want to be sure that we know what it is we expect to get out of this. Risks obviously speaks for itself. What is the risk of implementing this change in this process? What is the risk of not changing? And what kind of exposure do we have if we leave things as they are? Resources. What resources are going to be required? Obviously, we have to do cost analysis. Obviously, we have to think about what the capital outlay is going to be. But what is the human capital going to be? How much of my time? How much of my associates' time? How much of my staff's time is all going to be required for this? And how are we going to manage that over time? How are we going to manage the fact that we're going to be devoting people that should be working on client outcomes to this change process? Responsibility. Change management requires ownership of the process. And at the end of the day, you can have a sign on your desk from Harry Truman that says the buck stops here, but that doesn't really mean that you're responsible for it if you really aren't the one who's driving the change. So understand the roles of everybody responsible in the process of change. And then I love this one. This one gets overlooked a lot. Relationship. Relationship to what? So if I have systems here, and we're going to talk a little bit about what systems and how they interact together in just a second. But if I'm changing perhaps my contact system. So I'm changing to a different phone automated system and an automated receptionist. How is that going to impact my CRM and my intake? And have I really thought that through? Have I thought about how those two applications are now going to work against each other? Because right now, I don't like my phone system. I don't like my automated receptionist, but I really love my CRM system. And so anything that I choose to replace the other system with, I have to make sure it's still going to work well with my other systems. So you're going to want to measure out against all of those different pieces and make sure that you have an answer for each one of those 7 R's. So what does a resilient solution look like? And that is not what I wanted to do. I am missing a line in there. I apologize for that. Well, think about this, is that at the bottom there, it's supposed to answer this question, which is solve for journeys, not for applications. So we've talked a little bit about the importance of the client journey, but when we're talking about change, there is just an immediate impulse that's going to say, I want to fix this application. I want to fix this hardware interface. I want to fix this one thing. But really what we should be thinking about is looking at the entire client journey and solve for the weakest link. It's not about modernizing applications. It's about understanding how all applications work together to ensure the best client outcomes. And so you want to be solving for those journeys and for that solution more than you want to be trying to just fix a broken piece of your IT infrastructure. And so we do that taking 3 different looks at it. First of all, taking a risk-based approach. So when we think about the risk-based approach, what that really means is 2 different things. We have first the business-driven top-down approach, where we're looking at, again, those priorities and we're thinking about the client journeys and how is this going to be impacted by it? What risks are we mitigating? What risks are we exposing? But then there's also a bottom-up that does calculate the risk profile of the technology component I'm using. So going back to that conversation about reception services and things like that, if I'm going to change that, am I going to risk how other applications within my technology stack interact with it? And then we want to talk about this other one. This one I really want to drill down on is avoiding the single source solution. So I came to a discussion earlier today, and Krista Hermans was presenting. She runs a estate planning practice in California. She's got multiple offices. I did ask her permission to use her name and talk about her before I started doing this. But what she was discussing was how app integration with her Clio platform impacts her business and how she's using it. And one of the things she talked about is that she uses more than 15 different applications that have a direct integration into Clio for her. So what that means is that she may use Clio as her source of truth, but she has data feeds coming in from all of her sources, so she's not having to do duplicate entries and things like that. And that idea of that is thinking about platform as a service versus software as a service. When we think about software as a service, there's going to be an impulse, a desire to try and find a single solution that does everything. That one-stop shop where I can do my case management, my law practice management, my calendaring, my docketing, my time billing, my billing to customers, my accounting. It's great. I don't have to talk to a bunch of vendors. I don't have to think about a bunch of different people that I'm going to interact with. I don't have to learn different systems. I just have to learn this one. Until one aspect of that application no longer works. Perhaps it's your docketing. Perhaps it's your calendaring. But something's broken within it. And now every other system that you have in your office is dependent on that solution. And so to create change there, you're going to have to change everything within your office. Whereas if we look at a platform approach, what you're really doing is you're having a single hub which other applications can plug into. And we're going to seek out those best in breed applications that are going to give us those best results. And then when we go through this change analysis the next time, we can look at and say, you know what? This part of the stack is not working or answering the questions that we want to have answered anymore. It may be solving the problems today, but we can see that there are going to be issues with this tomorrow. And so we're going to have to work on removing that one piece. And when you remove that one piece, we go back through that analysis that we've been discussing to this point, but we don't break the entire system apart. And that's going to be a much more resilient solution. If part of that system fails, if you have an application that you love and you've been using for 5 years, and suddenly the software company says, yeah, we're going to go end of life on that application, again, start the process, look for a new solution to replace that one part of it, but now my entire infrastructure isn't going to fall in on itself because part of it's not working any longer. And then, of course, being proactive, not reactive. That's going to be a theme always in all of this, is that kind of that concept of if you're a hockey player, skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. So you're going to want to look for solutions that answer today's problems, but are prepared for tomorrow's questions. And that's a really important concept, because if you sit and think about change as addressing the problems you have today and don't plan for those changes and problems you have tomorrow, you're not solving anything. You're just pushing it off and putting it a little bit farther down the line. So I'm going to show you a process here, building a tech stack that grows with your business. Okay, I love this slide, because this is a process slide that I use when I talk to customers and I talk to them about the process that we employ to look at what they're doing. And I show it off and I say it's got 5 steps, and I know these steps inside and out, doing that survey of the stakeholders, determining metrics for success, review the results, configuration, developing workflows, test. You'll see I'm testing for everything. Testing is the most important thing to me. I just love it, because every time I tell people, this is going to solve that problem. And then we go through testing and I say, this didn't solve the problem. But we know now we know that it didn't, so we're going to fix it. And then training. Think about this, as I always love the saying, train the trainers. You have to make sure that you have training in place. You cannot come through with a solution and then only have 2 people in your office that know how to use it. So think about having a training practice. But the point of all of this slide is that this is a process. It is not the process. And you need to think about steps to be able to build your own process, what's going to work for you and what's going to work in your office. So I like to share this one just with the idea that what we're really trying to accomplish here is show how I would take all of these applications and all of these concepts that we're talking about today and apply it into a real world example. And so what I think about, kind of when I'm talking about building that tech stack that grows with your business, divide and conquer. So what does divide and conquer means? It means that I don't have to solve every problem all at once. As a matter of fact, breaking a project down into smaller parts is usually a better way of doing it. Iterative change allows for adaptation. It allows for you to change your plan as you're going along, because you're going to learn lessons as you begin to change one part of your technology stack. And it also allows you an opportunity to spread the work out in such a manner that's not going to interrupt your client journeys, your customer experience. Adaptability, again, we've talked about what adaptability is. You have to be able to adapt to change. You have to be able to anticipate both the known and the unknown. How do you anticipate the unknown? Well, what the thought process is, when you say anticipate the unknown, have the ability to be reactive by being proactive. In other words, give yourself those solutions that are going to be able to be molded and changed and adapted over time. And then finally, parallelism. So this goes back to when we were talking about those R's and we're talking about relationship. We're talking about how does changes in one part of my tech stack affect another part of it. Working on both of them at the same time, testing them for congruence with one another is going to be really crucial to being successful and implementing changes that are going to improve your system rather than tear it back down. So, all of these questions get asked, all of this process gets done. How do we know when we have a truly resilient solution? Or when are we there? And truly the answer to that is, I think, quoted by Ben Franklin the best. When you have finished changing, you are finished. Meaning, once you stop adapting, once you stop that process, you're done. You cannot continue to grow as an organization if you are not constantly implementing and thinking about changing and improvement. And it seems exhausting at times. But what you find is that when you really take this mindset to always thinking about what tomorrow's issues are going to be while you're sitting at your desk today, it becomes a culture. It becomes a way of thinking. It becomes a way of doing things. And so it doesn't seem like a heavy lift when it's just a constant mindset. Because at the end of the day, companies that aren't growing aren't succeeding. You have to continually be prepared for growth. And so you want to think about that as a key competitive differentiator. You want to think about the fact that there's no growth without change. And I've been privileged to sit and I've looked at clients that have dramatically changed what they do. And the difference between the ones that have long-term success versus the ones that maybe fall a little short is that many of the times we've gone through this process and we've been very successful, and then they literally put the whole concept of change on a shelf and go back to what they were doing, and then they come back to us in 2 or 3 years with a new crisis. Versus those firms that just adopt this mindset and they're perpetually prepared for it. So when they contact us, they're asking about, hey, I think that we want to look at this one area or this one aspect of our business because I think we can be better, versus our house is on fire and we have no water. So I just want to kind of drive that thought home that it's a process. It's what you want to be doing and thinking about always with your business, and that you always want to, again, keep in mind, what is the focus on? Focus is on client journeys, client outcomes, and how I am prepared to best deliver the most efficient and best results for my clients. So that's everything I have today. I am happy to take some questions from anyone who has them. And by the way, don't bother raising your hand to me. I can't see anything. The young lady with the microphone will help you.
First off, thank you. It was a very dense conversation. A lot of information, really rapid fire there. I'd like to go back to what you were saying at one of the first slides, where you're talking about how you have the picture of the four people happy and smiling. Then you take the look back and you see, and we're talking about how you basically have to get buy-in, right? Mm-hmm. And that's whenever we started talking about finding all of the. Started getting a little nervous there.
No. You're nervous.
I am interested.
I'm nervous.
The issue that I was seeing when on that slide was having buy-in from like an entire company, and can make things really, really slow, and makes that ability to change almost impossible. You really slow down. How do you balance those two things?
Well, a couple of different ways. Look, especially if you have a large organization. I come from a company with 15,000 employees. And yet we did a recent survey, and more than 85% of the employees globally at Intuit responded to the question of, my company hears my voice and considers what I have to say. And I was just blown away by that. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that? And so it kind of comes down to a couple of things. So when we were showing them team change and they were happy and they were buying in, we see all those other people disconnected. Well, they weren't connected because they weren't engaged by the organization. So one of the things that you do is that you want to take those surveys from folks. You want to ask the questions and ask everybody to participate. You know, a great tool out there, SurveyMonkey is a great one. There are other tools out there. Just putting surveys out continually, asking for feedback and input, and then reporting that back out. One of the things that's really important is people don't want to answer a question if they think that the question and then their answer is just thrown into a drawer and forgotten about. So one of the things that you can do is, when you want to engage with your team, ask those questions, and then once you have everybody's answers back, and again, do make it anonymous, give them the feedback. So we have 10 people in the firm. 4 of them think everything's working great. 4 of you think that things could be a lot better, and 2 of you weren't really certain. Well, when I hear that, what I mean is I know which bucket I fell into, and I know I'm one of those 4 or I'm one of those 2, and I was listened to. And so that's the first step. And then the next step is not just hearing them, not just engaging with them, but actually showing them and demonstrating that they are invested in this process and that there is something for them to gain out of it. So explain what you're doing. Don't just tell, explain. And what that means is that based on the feedback that we've gotten from our clients, from you, our employees, and from our advisors that we've retained to come in and help us with this is the strategy and plan that we're coming up with. And this is the flow of how it's going to go. And so you don't want to ask for feedback on everything you're doing. At this point, you hopefully have gotten the feedback that you need from your employees. But if they want to come to you on an individual basis and give you their feedback, listen. Because you know what? Sometimes people will not think of what they want to say or how they want to say it until it's put right in their face. And they're like, oh, that's a terrible plan. And here's why. Well, I want to hear that. So when they feel that you're responsive and receptive to what they have to say, you're going to create a culture of inclusivity, and you're going to create a culture of listening and validating people's feelings and emotions about things. Because again, it goes back to emotional commitment is 4 times more powerful than rational commitment. So you want people to feel emotionally bought into that plan, and then you'll get that buy-in. Anyone else? All right, well, again, I want to thank all of you for spending some time with me here. I can also make this deck available. I have had requests before when I've done this presentation to say, hey, can I see what your process was? So please, we can make sure that you get a copy of the deck, because we'd be more than happy to share that with you. But again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to engaging with you all throughout the rest of this evening. Thanks.